Ladies and gentlemen, it's my honor, my privilege to welcome Mr. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Let's give him a round of applause.
Bienvenido. Bienvenido.
Sí se puede, sí se puede, sí se puede. I want to tell you how happy I am to be here today. I want to start by introducing my son, Aiden. This is my sixth child, Aiden Villegas Kennedy. And Aiden is a national hero in Puerto Rico because he was born when I was serving a 34-day sentence in a Puerto Rican prison for suing the Navy and for protesting the Navy bombing of one of the poorest communities in Puerto Rico. So I know many of you know much more about the history of the Farm Workers Union than I do, but I want to put it in some historic context and explain what my father found when he came out here to see Cesar for the first time. During the early 1900s, we almost lost democracy in this country. We had giant corporations, the Rockefellers, J.P. Morgan, Carnegie, the Osbornes, who had taken over our country, and they had eliminated the middle class. They hand-picked senators for themselves. It was said of John D. Rockefeller that he had done everything to the Pennsylvania state legislature except to refine it. They owned the politicians. And first you had Teddy Roosevelt, who came along and passed the Sherman Antitrust Act and bust up the big corporations. He made it illegal for corporations to give donations to federal political candidates. He had the 40-hour work week. He banned child labor, and he began strengthening the middle class in this country. And his nephew, Franklin Roosevelt, came and targeted strengthening unions and having progressive legislation that would bring prosperity to all Americans and not just the very rich. But in order to do that, he had to get that legislation through Congress. And Congress and his party were controlled by Southern Democrats. And they made a deal with them. They did not want to see black people advance from slavery. So they said, we will tolerate all these rules about you that make it easy for unions to organize, but we are not going to allow blacks to join unions. So we're going to exclude the two places where blacks are mainly employed. One, domestic help, people who worked in other people's homes as maids. Secondly, farm workers, because the Southern Democrats were part of the old Confederacy, the old slave states, and they wanted to make sure that they could continue to treat black people who worked on farms as slaves. And that was what Cesar Chavez was dealing with when he began organizing, and when the Filipinos when Larry and Cesar began organizing out here, they were dealing with growers who felt that they had a God-given right to treat their workers as if they were slaves. And most Americans didn't understand this. And my father did not understand this. And Walter Reuter and Paul Schrade, who is here, and I want Paul to stand. And Paul Schrade convinced my father to come out here, and you know Paul Schrade. When my father was killed in June of 1968, Paul was standing next to him, and he took bullets himself. And he's a great American hero and a great hero of the labor movement. So when my father came out here, he came reluctantly. He didn't want to this was not something, he didn't know anything about farming. he didn't really want to get involved in this issue, but then he went to Kern County and he heard what the sheriff said and what the sheriff deputy said, that they were putting, he asked them, why are there all these farm workers in prison? Have they been breaking the law? And the sheriff said, no, we put them in prison for their own protection. My father had been attorney general, and he said, the Constitution does not allow you to put somebody in prison who did not break the law. And when we have lunch, you need to go out and read the United States Constitution. And my father had a feeling for the underdog anyway, and then he saw how democracy was being subverted, how the people, the institutions, the law enforcement institutions that were meant to protect the poorest people among us instead had been captured by the industry that they were supposed to regulate, and that they were putting people in jail who complained about the slavery that they were living with. And my father was outraged, the treatment of these workers, the subversion of democracy in a country and a government that he loved. And he went out that day and he joined the picket line. And from then on, he was all in. And my mother always says about my father's relationship with Cesar that they would have been friends under any circumstances that they met. They were so much alike. They were both of short stature. They were both deeply pious Catholics. They both had lots and lots of children. And neither of them was a good retail politician. They weren't backslappers. They weren't glad-handers. They weren't good at small talk. But they both had an intensity and a fierce adherence and courage about standing up for principle, and a willingness to make sacrifices on behalf of broader principles that help the larger community and larger society and as a whole. And my father became so close to Cesar Chavez that in March of 1968, he came out here and ended right over there at that building a 24-day fast or 25-day fast. And at that time, he told Cesar Chavez something that he hadn't told any of us. Cesar was the first person to know that my father had made the decision to run for president. He hadn't told his aides, he hadn't told his children, he hadn't told his wife. But he told Cesar. And on that trip, his aides, and Paul can tell you this, his aides told him, you cannot go see Cesar Chavez. Because if you do run for president, you will lose the election if you're seen by him, because these people are regarded as troublemakers, as rabble-rousers, as people who are trying to upset the social system. That's right. And a lot of Californians, like Ronald Reagan, believes that they're communists, who was governor at the time. So my father said to them, he said one short sentence. He said, yeah, I know, but I really like Cesar. And he got on the plane and he came out here. And then during the election, Cesar turned out the farm workers in all the cities in Southern California, and he got out the vote, and he helped my father win that last election of his life. And my family, of course, has been part of the Chavez family ever since. And we love you, Helen. We love you, Paul. We love all of the Chavez. Arturo is my friend, my amigo, my partner in so many great endeavors. And we are part of this family. And I'll say one last thing, that my father believed that our nation would be judged, our generation would be judged by future generations. And that we weren't going to be judged based upon the size of our army or the throw weight of our weapons or the wealth of our citizens or the power and influence of our corporations. But we're going to be judged based upon how we care for the most unfortunate members of our society, how we go out and round up and include everyone. how we avoid the seduction of the notion that we can advance ourselves as a people here in the United States by leaving our poor brothers and sisters behind. And what Caesar did had made him a hero as great as any hero who gave his life during the United States, the revolution against Great Britain. The people who sacrificed their lives, their fortunes. Caesar is as big a hero as anyone because he completed American democracy. He went out and he included people who had never been included before. And for that, every American owes him a debt of gratitude. Si se puede. 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 Si se puede.